Disclosures like these tear at the fabric of responsible government.
We're looking at all of the things that we can do to stem the flow of this information.
This was the biggest leak in the history of this particular planet.
My name is Julian Assange. I'm the editor of WikiLeaks. We help you get the truth out. If you get this material, give it to us, no questions asked, and you'll help change history.
So the timing here is, I would say, interesting, not only because the Bradley Manning trial is about to begin, but because Washington has really been consumed in the last couple of weeks with very aggressive Justice Department tactics against journalists and their sources. Specifically, I think the most troubling iteration of that was a criminal warrant alleging that a Fox News reporter, Rosen, was a criminal co-conspirator with the leaker to him because together they had plotted on how to wrest classified information from the government. It's a familiar theory, although it's never before been articulated by the government to those of us who have been looking at the WikiLeaks story, because that seems to be the basis for the WikiLeaks grand jury that's been sitting in Virginia, right?
I don't know what the basis for the grand jury investigation is in Virginia, because that's one of the great mysteries about it. We don't know. But the question is, if that attempt is to criminalize journalism, then we should all be terribly concerned.
Right.
The question is whether or not they're trying to carve out something special. I suspect, but I have no knowledge, that the reason that no indictment has been brought is because they reckon that going after WikiLeaks is not unlike going after the New York Times or the Guardian or Der Spiegel.
Which seems exactly right, doesn't it?
Yes.
Right, and that it seems like the government strategy was to split off WikiLeaks from the herd. We'll attack WikiLeaks for doing more or less the same things that these other journalistic entities do. In fact, we'll attack WikiLeaks for articles that are published in the New York Times and make them seem like they're more part of the leaker rather than part of the publisher.
That's right.
There doesn't seem to be any real legitimate legal basis for doing that.
I would agree totally.
Yeah.
I think there's no legal distinction between WikiLeaks and the New York Times.
Right. There is another kind of perversity here, which is that, we're about to have this trial of the century of Bradley Manning. There have been no trials of the people who perpetrated many of the human rights abuses, that are documented in many of the materials that he leaked and also in your prior film. And so there is this real asymmetry in the same way that the government goes after people who leak information about torture but not torturers.
Correct.
That there's this big prosecution of Manning, and yet we really haven't grappled as a country with the broader issues of accountability. No,
we haven't. I mean, I remember talking on this whole issue of Abu Ghraib, for example. There were a lot of people who came up to me and said the problem, including Michael Hayden, the problem was those pictures. We never should have released those pictures. And you have to ask, well, why? You mean to prevent the government from being properly embarrassed for the outrageous crimes that allowed to happen? So that seems to be the concern, not, oh my God, how did we allow something like this to happen? You would think that would be more of the concern. Oh my God, a crime has been committed, not, oh my God, pictures detailing a crime have been released.
This does present genuinely hard issues, not just easy ones. We focused on, I think, some of the easy ones.
Sure.
But let's talk for a minute about some of the harder ones. So first of all, looking at the Manning trial, it's hard to conceive that a system is going to allow a set of rules that allows each Army private to make these kinds of decisions for himself. On the other side of the ledger, there's 4 million people now with security clearances, tens of thousands who have that classification stamp. And it can't be that any government bureaucrat, by just stamping on a piece of paper, can take that out of the public debate about critical issues of war and peace, crime, abuse, fraud. So figuring out how the public's right to know can be accommodated against the government's now overbroad, but in some cases legitimate interest is a difficult question, isn't it?
Well, you have to begin to separate things out. And I think, one of the interesting things that Bill Leonard, the former classification czar in the Bush administration, says in the film is that you have to begin to look at the fact that actually improperly classifying materials should make people subject to the same kind of punishment as releasing classified documents, but there's absolutely
course.
no
Right.
symmetry there whatsoever, and yet there should be. There's no punishment whatsoever
Right.
for improperly classifying materials.
You know, and another difficult set of issues revolves around the role of journalists in a national security
That's
situation, right? And for all the distancing from WikiLeaks that some news organizations have done, there's also been a fair amount of copying. You know, first the Wall Street Journal, now the New Yorker, they've been building systems like the one that WikiLeaks used so that people can leak them documents anonymously without the journalist knowing where the sources come from. So there is some interest on the part of the more mainstream media to receive information in the way WikiLeaks has. But it does raise the question, you know, if you are a journalist and you are the recipient of this kind of information, you must feel a very strong obligation to share that information with the public.
Indeed.
You know, I mean,
your job as a journalist is to act on behalf of the public, not on behalf of the government, and there is a difference.
Right.
Because after all, part of the reason that we cherish the First Amendment is because we attempt to hold the government to account.
Right.
And if we can't do that, then next stop tyranny.
Right, and I think, you know, the government has really done itself a disservice across administrations, across decades, in the way that they have made claims of national security. From the Pentagon Papers, where they said that the publication would cause grave harm to national security, to the Manning leaks, which were accompanied by some of the very, very same claims, although most of the evidence shows that there hasn't been real harm, right?
They speak with forked tongue in this sense, and against each other. We show a clip in the film that says, this, quoting the State Department, State Department says there has been no lasting damage as a result of the Manning leaks.
There may, in fact, have been some of the opposite. If you
benefit.
credit some of the reports that the Arab Spring, which really got going in Tunisia, was related in some way to WikiLeaks cables about the corruption of their dictator, a lot of good has actually been generated. Well, it'll be interesting to see how the Manning trial plays out here, and you know, this is an issue that we've dealt with, you know, as I said, in all kinds of administrations, in the Bush administration, in the Obama administration, and so long as there is this massive overclassification, so long as governments classify critical information about decisions involving war and peace and the like, we're going to rely on unauthorized leaks in order to function properly as a democracy, aren't we?
Correct. I think the point is that leaks is an accepted action. It's a pressure valve for a democracy. And after all, the government leaks. They leak all the time for their own purposes. We need a mechanism of leaks to be able to hold the government to account. It's not written down anywhere exactly how it's supposed to work. That's the odd thing about it. But we're so out of balance now in terms of punishing the leaker. After all, the Obama administration has now prosecuted more people under the Espionage Act for leaking than all previous administrations combined. And I think it shows also what happens to power resting in the hands of the executive. They don't give it back. You know, they take more and more and more until we, the people, say enough.
Well, you know, we'll have to hope that more people in the right circumstances, you know, follow the examples of some of these courageous leakers and whistleblowers, and that more news organizations show the courage to publish that information in the face of real government pressure.
Correct.
Thanks for the conversation, Alex.
Thanks, Ben.
Enjoyed it.